What's up, internet? It's your boy Broken Dichotomy, and I'm the creative director at xCephasx Studios, where we create animations for clothing brands and snack brands. So if you need an animation, all my information is in the description, and let's jump right into today's video. Today we have none other than the most stupidest debate ever, atheists versus Christians. I don't even realistically know how to get into this. One could say that atheism and Christianity are both cults. That's what, like I said, broken dichotomy, right? So let's get into today's video and see the stupidity that lies behind yet another Jubilee video. Start!
Child dies of leukemia.
Could there be a purpose to it?
Did God command the ethnic cleansing of the land of Israel?
I'm not saying the scribe made something up. I'm saying the scribe has a command.
So where did they get that command from?
From God.
I had Jesus appear to me 3 years ago.
I don't know what's happening now. I have to suspect it's some kind of psychological phenomenon. Hi, my name's Alex O'Connor. I'm an atheist and host of the Within Reason podcast.
Alex
Today I'm
O'Connor is
surrounded
wild
by
with his
25
claims, bro.
Christians who, God willing,
His
might
claims are
change them.
crazy, bro. Alex,
My
you're
first
crazy
claim
with
is
these
that
claims.
suffering makes God's existence unlikely.
To debate Alex claims the Christians was into the... I will say one thing. I've always hated the way they have to run into the center of the whole entire thing. Like, it's the stupidest method for finding out who can go in and debate. Why not just press a button or have some kind of a buzzer? What is this? You guys are all dumb, bro.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Why don't you just begin? Why does suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with two hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find...
Wait, hold up. So this man's entire first point is going to make is suffering makes God's existence unlikely. Okay, well, before we even let these two debate about the whole entire discussion, let me just add my 2 cents. So you're telling me that because man is allowed to suffer, that makes the idea of God's creation unlikely. The idea that God himself could exist is unlikely because God allows man to suffer. He allows the young child of 2 years old to die of leukemia. So you're saying because this is allowed, God must not exist. Bro, are you stupid, dude? Are you dumb? Listen, there is an experiment that was done way back in the day. It's called the rat paradise. Rat paradise experiment, all right? Look it up if you guys need to look it up. But essentially, rat paradise was, they gave this group of rats everything they could possibly want. Food, water, shelter, other rats to mate with. They literally made the perfect environment for the rats to live in. There was no obstacles, no suffering in this environment. And you know what happened to the rats? They all ended up dying. All the rats ended up dying and killing each other, became cannibals and all killed everybody. Why? Because there was nothing, no obstacles, there's nothing to fight against. So they just became super lazy and they created problems amongst themselves. What you have to understand is that the yin and yang in this world, you need the dichotomy. You need both sides, all right? That's the idea why I said that I'm broken dichotomy, but I'm just saying, you know, that for this part, you need the dichotomy. You need the good and the bad, the yin and the yang. On a blank white canvas, there's always going to be a small black dot. That represents the problem. On a big black canvas, there's always going to be a small white dot that represents the light and the hope that is possible amongst the darkness. So this idea of like we're supposed to live in this world where there's no suffering, no one can get sick. Come on, bro. Your life would be absolutely miserable.
And I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals and ultimately human beings into existence. A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
What is your, I guess, epistemology? How do you know that this is the case, that it's less likely, and that, you know, an atheist worldview, a naturalistic worldview would look like the way it is today?
Of course, we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth. I
like being a guy.
I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. What I would say is that if we actually take into account the holistic view of the scriptures, which I do think that you have to do, we see that it's actually much more coherent once you acknowledge that evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right? And so
Exactly. Evil cannot be literally, you cannot humanize evil. You cannot say, oh, this is the shape of evil. Like I always tell everybody, heaven and hell is within man. The kingdom of Christ is within your mind, all right? So you can't step outside and say, look, there's evil. It's taking on the shape of that black sheep. Oh, there's evil. It's the crow or the raven. No, that's what we call exponentialism, bro. That's outside of you. That isn't real, okay? That's not a real thing. You cannot say that. Evil is within everybody, okay? Evil is within us all. It can start off as a little tiny mustard seed and grow into a massive oak tree, depending on where you're trying to draw the line of your morality and your ethics. So if you are like these super rich billionaires, right, that keep amassing large amounts of money, at a certain point, they have to cut off the morality and say, I'm going to allow this to happen. I'm going to allow this to happen. I'm going to allow this to happen. Why? Because they want more and more money. Greed. So they are allowing their greed to take over themselves as human beings. So because they're doing this, they have to say, okay, you know what? Letting a couple 100,000 people die in India so then I can develop my chips for this new technology I want to do is just something that's going to have to happen. And so they allow that to happen. And then now that you've crossed that barrier, killing another additional 100,000, 20 people doesn't seem so big. So you say, okay, well, now there's a different place where we have to move a bunch of land and create a water dam so that we can generate energy for this new plant I want to build. How many people do we have to displace in this area? How many people do we have to kill in this area? Okay, well, probably 1 million people are going to have to die. All right, well, that's no problem. I've already taken out 100,000. I don't think a factor of 10 multiplier is going to really affect anything. So we've already killed 100,000 last year. This year we have to kill 1 million. Let's do it. Because it's going to equate to a large amount of money on the bottom line. So why not do it? I want to see more money. I want more money. So now my morality is messed up. It's affected. See, this is where I'm coming from. This guy, y'all niggas need to stop
So
it,
I'm
bro.
not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
can you distinguish suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced, right? And so even if you don't have a moral objectivism, you can still say that suffering exists. So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that events like this occur?
Well, because the ultimate view here is that...
Okay, pause.
Nice to meet
Too
you.
bad. He's like, get out of here, buddy. Told you, the system is flawed.
How's it going? Nice to meet you.
Okay, so my first question to start out with is what exactly about suffering makes this unlikely on the condition that God exists?
I think that if God is all loving, then he probably wouldn't want his creatures to suffer. And so I think that the fact that they do suffer makes his existence less likely.
Okay, perfect. And is there some specific aspect of suffering that you're particularly honing in on,
Yeah.
horrendous or
in
whatever that is?
particular, non-human animal suffering? Because I think that the Christianity has a celebrated tradition of theodicies trying to explain why suffering is.
Right. But here's the other point. If he's talking about if God is all loving, then there wouldn't be any kind of suffering. All right, then take God out of the equation, right? Take God out of the equation and say, let's say there is no God, right? Let's say we are thinking in the realm of atheism. All right, so if we're believing in atheism, do atheists believe in physics? Do they believe in science? Or are they completely saying that we just randomly appeared on this planet? Because if you take a baby and you throw a baby out of a window, no one, like the universe isn't going to stop the baby from plummeting down onto the ground and splatting. So are you saying that there is no physics because physics allows the baby to fall and plummet to its death and explode and die? This is what I'm talking about. Like his whole entire ethos doesn't really make any sense because even if you were to remove the idea of God from the equation, there's still suffering in the world. Are you saying that electricity doesn't exist because you can touch electricity and because electricity isn't all loving, you can die? Hundreds and thousands of volts of electricity will zap through your body and kill you? So his entire thing isn't really making any sense, dude. Like, why is no one touching base on these topics or touching base on these talking points? Like, everyone's just like, oh no, because they're suffering, God can't exist. Come on, man.
Human free will,
Stop!
the development of the soul, higher order goods, all of this kind of stuff, none of which apply to the suffering of non-human animals.
Have you heard of the axiological expectation mismatch problem?
Let's go!
Okay, so philosophy...
A situation where there is discrepancy between what someone expects to be good or valuable based on their personal values, beliefs, and what they actually observe in the world, leading to a sense of conflict or distance. That is exactly what I was just talking about throwing the baby out the window, bro.
Philosophers of religion have started to understand that the thing that actually generates a problem between God and suffering is actually the value system you attach to the very attribute of perfect lovingness. Because the problem of evil is an internal critique, you have to look at a very specific version of theism and how it defines perfect lovingness. I want to present to you a version where my version of perfect lovingness does not actually constitute a problem and a misalignment, that mismatch between the suffering of animals, let's just say the profusion of suffering of animals, and the existence of God.
So let's hear it. What kind of God are we imagining that would allow and oversee and do nothing to prevent billions of years of untold animal suffering?
Right, so you're talking about non-prevention.
Or setting up the system.
Why is he talking about this idealistic world?
That it relies upon things like predation and disease.
Well, the first part is I don't agree with the whole setting up the system part. So I'm not one of those theists that believes that God does this select and pick idea of creating worlds. I don't think that God actually creates worlds. I think that God lets worlds develop according in a certain way, but because God can oversee an overarching narrative, he knows exactly how he can redeem.
People didn't like that. People didn't like the fact that he's talking about God doesn't actually create the worlds. Well, then, if God doesn't create the world, what are you talking about, dude? Isn't that the whole thing in Genesis? So God created the earth, the water, the lights. So if he didn't create the world, then how do we even actually exist? So this point that he's making is actually kind of, I don't know. He was really cooking. He was cooking up to this point, and then he just said something that I don't even know, dude.
Sorry, go ahead.
Could God have made it such that animals were all herbivores instead of carnivores and omnivores?
Yes, he could totally do that.
Okay, so had he done that, here's an
What's
interesting
up,
way
chat?
to reduce
Throw one in the chat. If you're with me right now, throw one in the chat right now, boy.
by orders of magnitude the amount of suffering that exists.
Right, but hold on. That's particularly assuming a value theory already that I haven't told you I'm adopting. That
Throw
has a
one in the
problem
chat
with
if the
evil. So I
audio
have
is
to give you
good,
my
if you
value
can hear
theory
me.
first for you to show that misalignment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Perfect. Okay, so my value theory says that it's not the most important thing about a sentient creature is not what merely happens to them. It's about the total timeline of their life and how and where their life permanently ends. Meaning, if you were to judge an author of a narrative, and the first few chapters, let's say, there's a lot of bad things happening, but the end ends with this crescendo where there's victoriousness, there's redemption, there's beauty, and everyone in the story actually endorses their entire existence that they live. They can look at their they can look at their total timeline, and they actually each subjectively come to the conclusion, I'm glad I was made, and I totally see what my suffering was for. That's the particular I'm using with. So we have to judge, hold on, like John Hicks says, we have to judge the very nature of God's lovingness by what he does in the end, not these few time slices that we observe right now.
I want to check this out real quick. Oh, the mic's working nicely. Okay, good. All right, so yeah, this point that this man is making makes absolute sense. This is what I was saying about you need both sides. I'll use the word of the day again, dichotomy. You need two halves. You need the good and the bad, because with the bad, it allows you to be able to appreciate the good. All right, and vice versa. You need both of them. You can't appreciate the sunset or sunrise without rainy days. And you can't appreciate rainy days without the beautiful sun. Like some days, people love rainy days. Sometimes you hate the rainy day. Sometimes you love the sun when it comes out. Sometimes when there's too much sun, what does everyone say? Ah, it's too hot. Ah, it's too much. Ah, I don't like the heat. It's getting too warm. Yeah, but then you're the one who's saying, oh no, I love the sun. I love the sun. So you need the balance of both to really appreciate the bigger picture. Man's is cooking again. He shouldn't have said that God doesn't create the worlds. He lets the worlds develop. That was his only point where he messed up, fam. Of course, God created the world, dog. What are you talking about?
Now, for you to show that there's a problem, you have to show to me that the suffering of animals cannot be transformed, are intrinsically cut off from being transformed into a life that they will endorse. There's a couple of theses on the table, but sure, go ahead.
Okay, so are you talking about the end of their life is in their end of life on Earth, or are you talking about the afterlife?
I'm antemortem, postmortem.
Okay, because if you're just talking about life on Earth, then I would say that if you had an author writing a book and a character, if we were trying to figure out the relationship between that author and the person in the book, and that person in the book shows up for 5 seconds in the first chapter and is a child who almost immediately dies of cancer in an incredibly painful way, and there's no development, there's no sort of bringing back to life, and suddenly everyone's grateful for it. It is just this miserable, tragic experience. And I asked, well, what did the author not want to do for the story of the book, but want to do for that character?
Yes.
I think it'd be pretty damning. And also, when it comes to animals, we're talking about animals who are predated on from the moment that they begin existence. They sort of have disease. Zebras, when they're killed by lions, are often too big to be killed instantly, so they die over minutes with their windpipes caught in the jaws of a lion. How can this be developing a zebra, which, by the way, probably doesn't even have the same kind of first-person conscious experience that humans do in order to sort of rationalize and abstract and learn from their sort of past and morally develop in that way? They just suffer. And what kind of God could oversee this?
Okay, so there's a lot of assumptions on the table again. Again, you're assuming a particular value system that I'm not.
I'll tell you what
out.
I'm assuming here. What I'm
Yes.
assuming here is that a good God would not allow unnecessary suffering to obtain.
Okay, gotcha. So we can talk
you
Yeah,
about
agree
but then by what metric is he a good God? Like, it's his own belief systems that he's saying, oh no, because the zebra gets eaten alive by the lions and is allowed to suffer, then God isn't. Like, what are you talking about, dude?
we can talk about unnecessary suffering. We're talking about the justifying norms for suffering. You're saying it has to be in terms of necessity, which is an evil is only authorizable by God if it's in connection to a greater good or prevention of a greater evil,
If
correct?
there's some kind of justification for allowing that
Yeah,
suffering.
but you're saying it's a necessary connection. Why you say what's the term of necessity?
So perhaps I should say unjustified instead of unnecessary.
Okay, so we both agree. I do not believe that God can authorize
Okay, so
justified,
tell me
unjustified suffering.
tell me how that example that I gave you, the deer with its leg
Right.
starving, is justified.
Because it's intrinsically redeemable, and the norms I'm working with is not this necessity condition that you're working with. Mine is about redeemable suffering, redeemability, or we call it
for the deer?
defeasability. If that suffering can be defeated
They're
within the
gonna
creature's life,
cook
I'll define what I
'em.
mean by defeat, which is that they can retroactively look back at what they went through and integrate it into their life history, where they look at their
Hold on,
life.
I have to interrupt because the example I gave you is one where the deer dies.
Yes, the deer dies. But here's the thing. You're probably talking about this post-mortem example. I'm going to put one thesis on the table. There's two philosophers that defend exactly what this goes through. One defends that animals will be given a martyrdom status. Well, God will be able to present himself in a way to animals in the afterlife, such that in the same way you could give praise to a dog, and the dog emotionally recognizes that he's loved and that his life is worth living, right? To these animals that suffered like that, there's one view on the table, which is that God will give them a praiseworthy status where they will be able to actually
Sure.
see
Can we talk about that claim? Because these animals are suffering for what? I mean, God might cause them to suffer
It's
a
not means
bunch.
to ends. This is not means to ends.
God might cause them to suffer a bunch and then essentially redeem them in the afterlife.
He doesn't care about the animal suffering, bro. He's just trying to use the animal suffering as some sort of, I guess, he's playing almost essentially like using the animal suffering as a sort of martyr system. Bro, animals have to, like, death is necessary in life, regardless if the animals are being eaten alive by lions or they're being eaten alive by man himself. It's necessary for the progression of environments and these biodiversities. People die all the time, okay? He's looking at it from a bigger picture, I guess, like, a point that you can understand from him, saying, yes, the lion eats the zebra, blah, 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 blood, suffering, blah, blah, blah. All right, great. But let's take it down to a micro level. Do you know that plants also fight each other? Plants fight and asphyxiate each other in the jungle, dude, for the battle of sunlight. If there's two plants that grow right beside each other, the stronger plant will grow in such a way that he will block the sunlight from the other plant, which will then kill that plant. And then also, if they're not fighting in that sense, then they're fighting underground with their roots. One plant will grow roots that are bigger than the other ones, and then thus asphyxiating that plant from growing, and then that plant will die. So this man's talking about, oh no, the suffering of the animals, the suffering of the animals. Dude, every creature on this planet is battling and surviving for its life. So this man's talking about, oh no, this, that. Stop it, dude. The plant life. Plants that people say, oh no, plants can't say or hear or do anything. Plant life literally fights for survival and kills other plants to survive. Are you going to say that, like, I'm done, dude. I'm done with the video. I'm done. I can't. This man's gonna. I'm choked. I'm choked, dude. I'm angry with this man's stupid nonsense.